With the NHL season just around the corner, we take a look at projected point totals for all 32 teams. Who will exceed expectations? Who will disappoint? We've got that and a whole lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Fan Duel. Download the Fan Duel app now by visiting fanduel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm Gil Martin. I'm here usually every Friday with Rachel Donner, but Rachel is out today, and it's great to welcome to the show from Locked On NHL Game Night, Alex Widerspiel. And Alex, welcome.
Gil, thanks for having me. Happy to come in up, get the call up from the AHL.
It's good to have you here, and it's a great time of year. Everybody's excited. The season is less than 2 weeks away, and the weather's getting cooler. Hockey is in the air right now.
Oh, it's the best time of year, the confluence of every sport, and then on top of it, NHL preseason starts. You can't pick a better time, honestly, on the especially after this summer. I don't know about you guys, but where we were, it was very humid all summer, and all I could think to myself during those 95-degree, 100% humidity days was, I'm ready for a hockey rink.
Always ready for hockey, and you could feel it in the air now, so that's a really good thing. So for this show, we're going to go division by division, take a look at the Fan Duel over-under point projections, and basically talk about some of the more interesting projections and whether we feel teams will live up to their projections, exceed it, or fall short of those projections. We'll start with the Atlantic Division. Alex, why don't you tell us the projections for the teams in that division?
Yeah, so leading the way, I think actually the Atlantic might even be the most interesting of all of them in terms of the current FanDuel projections. So let's start with the defending Stanley Cup champions who did not win the division last year. They're down a point from yesterday after the uncertainty of Alex Barkov's injury. They are set at a line of 104.5 points for the season. And yesterday when that was at 105.5, I was saying hammer the under, and I'm still there today. Even if Alex Barkov is totally fine, I would say hammer the under for a couple of reasons. The Panthers have what I would describe as sort of champagne problems, but they're the type of problems that or uptown problems, if you want, but they're the type of problems that they're kind of small. They're not going to stop them from making the playoffs, but they're the type of things that could limit their upside during the season. You know, aging goaltender who might need to take a few extra games off, backup goaltenders not coming off a great season. Again, depending on the Barkov situation, uncertainty about whether or not they have to trade a player off the roster to be cap compliant in the middle of the season, lack of assets to add. And then, of course, there's going to be at least 2 months without Matthew Tkachuk. So take all of that together and then add in the fact that they've been to 3 straight Stanley Cup playoffs or Stanley Cup finals, excuse me. They played the most hockey of anybody in the last 3 years. The last team to do that, Tampa, had back-to-back 98-point seasons when they did that exact same thing. So 104 just seems a little high for me for Florida. Toronto at 99.5, that seems a little low. That's like a 9-point drop based on just Mitch Marner alone. That seems a little high when you consider all the depth that they added. Austin Matthews played most of last year hurt. You would think that would be a bit of a production boost. I like the goaltending tandem as long as Joseph Woll is back in. So I like that as well. And then Buffalo and Detroit, also very odd to me where they're currently at today. I think Buffalo line is up to 87.5. That feels high for a team that I think is going to wind up in the bottom 2 in the standings this season. They're leaning on a goalie room that isn't great and a number 1 center who's missed 148 games over the last 4 seasons. And availability is a skill and maybe the most important thing when it comes to that. Conversely, Detroit at 83.5, I think, is low. Todd McClellan coming off a great run over 48 games, 96-point pace. So even if they regress a little bit over the course of a full season, I feel like Detroit at 83.5 is just really, really light. And when you consider that they have one of the deepest NHL-ready prospect pools, so they can afford guys getting hurt and won't see too much of a drop-off, and they added John Gibson to boot, my mind is that Detroit at 83 is a little light.
Yeah, it does seem a little low, and that Buffalo number seems high. It would be like an 8.5 point improvement over where they were last year.
Right, that's a big jump. I don't think a lot of people realize how big you have to how much improvement you have to show for 8.5 points. And that's not a Buffalo team that defended particularly well last year under Lindy Ruff. And while I do actually like the additions they got in the JJ Peterka deal, like I think Doan and Kesselring have the potential to help you defend better within structure. I'm not 100% sold that that's an 8-point bump alone.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit steep, but hey, you never know. This is why they play the games, right? I mean, bottom line, what is the next team we have on our list?
The only other one in the Atlantic that I think is super interesting is the Boston Bruins. They're at 79.5, and I actually kind of like the over there a little bit. And the main reason is, A, I do think they're going to wind up beating out Buffalo. B, if you look at their depth up and down the roster, very strong depth. Jeremy Swayman is probably not going to be impacted by the same issues as last offseason. And then the other thing that comes to mind for Boston is they lost, I think, 98 man games alone from their top two defensemen. It's unlikely that Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm are going to miss that amount of time again. And while I acknowledge that maybe Hampus Lindholm's injury will mean he's not quite the player he was, even just having him for 60 games instead of 17 would make a huge difference. And I suspect that a Boston team that went 5-11-2 after the trade deadline is probably a little better than that. So I think they might be in the low 80s, mid 80s. They're probably not a playoff team, but I don't think that they're going to be quite that bad.
Now we still have Montreal and Ottawa. Where are they?
I like where they're at, actually. I think the Fan Duel line kind of nailed those. Montreal comes in at today 90.5. I think that is spot on the money. Ottawa is at 95.5. I think Ottawa might come in a little under that. I think they're going to be right in the race for the wild card spot, but I wouldn't feel strong enough on that bet to say definitively go and slam the under there, because I think it's going to be real tight.
And how about Tampa Bay?
So Tampa's interesting. They're at 102.5, and I think that that's probably about right when you consider they're going to get a full season of Yanni Gordon and Oliver Bjorkstrand. But I don't love that last year it required to just hit that number last year. They needed a .921 save percentage from a 31-year-old goalie who hadn't done that in 3 or 4 seasons. So I might flirt with the under there, but again, I'm not super confident on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's right where they were last year. So it's like the perfect number, I guess, if you're going to have to make some tough choices. Let's shift over to the Metropolitan Division. And how about the Washington Capitals? They won the division last year.
Yeah, and they are not the most beloved by the betting lines right now. 94.5 point, which I actually think is about right on the money. There should be some level of aggression for Washington, because the interesting thing about the Capitals, where if you look by basically every metric, they were good in basically every metric, or they were average. There was nothing that they were particularly bad at. But the other thing is, for the numbers that they put up, a lot of it was riding one really, really red-hot goaltender and the 5th best penalty kill in hockey. Everything they did, I think, is replicable. I just don't know that they're going to be a 111-point team again. So if you want to hit the over because you think it's going to be somewhere in between the line and the current mark, that's fine. But I think FanDuel's pretty close on that one. The market's pretty close.
Yeah, I wonder if some of the players they had who had really good years will match that again this year. I mean, like Pierre-Luc Dubois, is he going to match what he did last year?
That's a really good question. It's always tough with PLD, right? Because you just never know what he was really motivated last season. What version of that player are they going to get any given season?
How about the Carolina Hurricanes, a perennial playoff team, but a team that's never quite gotten over the hump in the postseason?
I think 106.5 is about right for them, so it's a bet that I would probably avoid. That's the line today, and the big thing for me is that, so last year was kind of an outlier. They have declined. This is their 3rd straight season declining in points. But this was also a defensive core that was aging, right? Like we know that they replaced Brent Burns and Dmitry Orlov, and that Keandre Miller and Alex Nikishin are probably going to be the guys who are going to get bigger minutes there. Younger defensemen like Nikishin, there's going to be a learning adjustment, even though he's arguably maybe the best prospect from outside North America, and now coming over to North America. And Keandre Miller coming off a down year, but I still think there's some juice there with him in Carolina. So I think they're going to be up from where they were last year at 99. I just don't know how much up, and that's why that number to me between 99 and 111, which is where they were 2 years ago, boy, that's right in the sweet spot there.
Couple of teams that I think may be tough to predict: the New Jersey Devils and the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah, and the Devils, I think that number is, I'm not super confident, but I would say I'm probably favoring the under, mainly because with Jack Hughes, you have to account for the fact that this is a guy who's missed an average of 19 games per season over the last 4 years. So there's always a little bit of concern there. And while I like the Devils' depth better coming into this season, I feel like they're never quite... they've never quite figured out how to replace Hughes' production when he's not in. If you go, I don't have the numbers in front of me. If you go look at the numbers, the splits when he's out versus when he's in, they are a much worse team without him.
And then Columbus, they improved last year. They surprised a lot of people, but, were they sort of a step ahead of where they should have been in their development?
So they're at 84.5 right now for FanDuel, and I do like the over, but I agree with you. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily a playoff team. In my mind, what it means is that they've got a good farm system. So if guys get hurt, they've got guys who can fill in. Sean Monahan missed a bunch of games last year, so you think, okay, they got to 89, missing Monahan for 28 games. Now, granted, Monahan's injury history probably means he's going to miss some time again this year. The issue for me is they got to 89 and they needed Jet Greaves to go all world in the final 2 weeks of the season. I don't know if he could replicate a 940 save percent. I mean, I know he can't replicate a 940. That would be historic. But can he replicate a 910, a 915 over a larger sample? That's probably my big question. So I like Columbus with the over. I don't know how much over, but I do like the over there.
I also like the over on Columbus. I think they are a young, up-and-coming team, just not sure they're a playoff team just yet. All right, we have got a lot more to discuss. We'll continue with the Metropolitan Division, and of course, we'll hit the Western Conference as well. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Fan Duel. The NFL season is here, and Fan Duel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Again, $300 in bonus bets to use across the app if your first $5 bet wins. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Do you like player props, maybe building a same-game parlay for better odds, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds? It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel.com, check it out today. So you got the two New York teams next, the Rangers, the Islanders, kind of teams at a crossroads right now. Where are they projected, and how do you feel about them?
I feel like the Islanders are going to be one of the hardest teams to project this season. So the line is 84.5, and I feel like this team could do a little bit. Right now, my gut says the under, because my thought is that while this is a veteran team with goaltending, that if they wind up being good, if they wind up being not just necessarily good, but even just solid, I fully expect them not to engage in another sell-off and to try and be competitive. So that gives them a good chance going 84.5. we have seen, obviously, with the trade of Noah Dobson, that there is some thought towards the future here. So if they get off to a slower start, I can see this being one of those teams that they might make some additional moves early that take some of those veterans off the roster, and it might be a little harder to get to that 84.5 number. I think they're one of the hardest teams to predict this season. The Rangers, I like the over, by the way. They're at 95.5, and I think with the Rangers, the formula for them is pretty simple. They won 114 points 2 years ago in a President's Trophy by just being a middling 5-on-5 team because they have elite goaltending and they had an elite power play that season. Power play fell apart last year, but I anticipate with the return of David Quinn, who for any of his other faults is the guy who initially sparked this iteration of the Rangers power play to success under the Panarin and Fox era. I think that's going to be a huge help. I think Sullivan's going to be a huge help at 5-on-5. Gavrikov, I think, is going to be a huge help at 5-on-5. And I think JT Miller is going to be a huge help at 5-on-5 and on both sides of special teams. So all that said, I think the Rangers are a good regular season bounce back candidate for the over for that reason.
We head over to Pennsylvania for the Penguins and the Flyers, teams with lower expectations, perhaps. What's the projection and how do you feel about those?
Yeah. Oh man, Pennsylvania, rough time for this for the Keystone State in hockey. Pittsburgh set at 74.5. I honestly think you could consider hitting the under on that one when you think about the fact that it's a first-year head coach who has never been an NHL head coach before. Again, not that that's necessarily a bad thing. We saw it work out last year in Washington with Spencer Carberry, although he had a lot more experience coaching as well in the AHL than even Dan Muse does. But I think when you consider the fact that Brian Rust and Ricard Raquel are pretty high on the list of guys who are probably going to get traded, I think that makes that number look a little high. And then Philadelphia at 81.5, I also think that number is a little bit on the high side. I think Philadelphia is kind of a weird team, and I really like Rick Tocchet. I think there's a reason why this guy keeps getting jobs in the NHL. It's because he's willing to take really, really tough gigs. Of course, with the Coyotes, one of the things folks forget is that he actually got those guys to play a lot better defensively than
he did.
He had around him. But the issue with the Flyers is if we're just betting on the increased or improved vibes going from Tortorella to Tocchet, but with that defense core and that goaltending room, I don't know that I see that as enough to get above 81. That seems like a real stretch for me for a team that didn't hit that number last year.
Yeah, no, they did not. So be interesting to see how that goes. I think the under is also right. I think they're a year or two away from really starting to climb back up the standings. Over in the Western Conference Central Division, Winnipeg, 116 points last year, but I get the feeling they won't match that.
That'd be a big ask for sure. We don't often see that year to year. I do think the line is actually a little bearish on them. It's 98.5 right now for Fan Duel. And I would go ahead and hit the over there. I think that would be a very large regression year over year for a Winnipeg team that, yes, they did lose Nikolai Ehlers, but they didn't lose much else. And when you consider the fact that, again, solid prospect system, they've had to have that because of the market situation. And while Connor Hellebuyck, yes, had a disastrous postseason, we're talking about one of the very best regular season goaltenders of all time. I remember going back to the Rangers of the the mid 2010s. I remember plenty of years where the Rangers weren't great and Henrik Lundqvist would still drag them to 100 points. I'm thinking in particular about the 25-16 season where they got boat raced by the Penguins in the first round of the playoffs. That was a 100-point team, thanks in part because Lundqvist had a phenomenal season and they had good play from their backup. So I still like the over for Winnipeg.
How about Dallas?
Dallas, I'm pretty high on this year. They're basically bringing back their entire roster, and as long as they're not planning on trading Jason Robertson mid-season, I've got to think that even at 106.5, I think you got to hit the over for a team that has a real shot at winning the President's Trophy this year. Well,
they were right at 106 last year. The Colorado Avalanche, they're in an interesting position. What's your take on them?
104.5 is the line. I'm leaning over. I think over is pretty good. They tend to be a pretty good regular season team. And even with the trade, you look, a lot of folks got really heated in the debate over the trade of Mikko Rantanen. But it's worth noting that like the trade worked for a while in the regular season. They were much better after that trade because the thing with Colorado, there was a recognition that they had a real depth issue because they were without Landeskog, they were without Nichushkin, obviously Kadri, Burakovsky, all those guys were gone, and they decided, hey, we don't need 3 superstars, we need 2 superstars and a bunch of role players, and I'm of course alluding to McKinnon and Makar, and they got better in goal. I think Colorado is probably a good bet for the over at 104.5.
All right. How about Minnesota and St. Louis, 2 teams that made the playoffs last year, but they're kind of like on the, at the bottom of the playoff list, more or less. Can they stay healthy and can they improve?
Yeah, man, Minnesota's tough, right? They're 96.5, and you feel like they're pretty much always a lock for the first round, and you're going to be right around that number, right? Like you got to get, most years, you got to get to around 94 points to be in. Again, some variation some years. So if you're at 94, 96 doesn't feel like that big of a stretch for the Wild, but I do wonder if the Kaprizov situation does overtake that team a little bit. And they do have some youth along the blue line, how much they're going to rely on Zeev Buem, oh, his name always gets me. How much they're going to have to rely on him, I'll be curious about. And they have some injuries that they're dealing with as well. So that one's a line I'm probably staying away from. Conversely, I really like St. Louis. 92.5 feels a little low for a team that with Jim Montgomery, I mean, say what you will about the guy as a playoff coach, but he knows how to get teams into the first round of the playoffs. And if you're feeling like you're basically a lock to get in, the roster is built to win right now, or at least to be competitive right now, and you've got a coach who's going to accentuate those things, I feel like 92 is really on the low side for them.
All right. Well, we'll continue with the rest of the Central Division and the Pacific, which is full of talented teams. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. All right, the Utah Mammoth, newly named and kind of a team on the upswing, but what is their point total projection and where do you think they'll be, over or under?
Right, this is like the pundit darling, right? Like, Gil, how do you feel about the Utah? Because I don't know what to make of this team, right? The 91.5 is the line for the Mammoth, and I feel like they should beat that, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee a playoff spot. I am kind of curious, like, what do you think about Utah?
I like Utah. I like the way they're building their team kind of from the ground up. I think they have some young, talented players who may be ready to take that next step. But, playoffs, it's going to be really close just because of how competitive that division is.
Agree. I think the Central is the best division in the sport, hands down. So there's a good chance like the 6th best team in that division could be the 3rd best team in the Pacific. In theory, it's possible.
It is possible. So how about Nashville and Chicago, 2 teams looking to bounce back from very disappointing seasons a year ago?
Yeah, and I don't want to get anyone's hopes up on Chicago. I at 69.5, I am taking the over here for a couple of reasons. One, I think the Connor Bedard conversation has been very, very strange to me. I think, yes, he's not been Connor McDavid, but you look at the numbers he's put up as an 18 and 19-year-old in a man's league. He's done really, really good work on a very, very bad team. And keep in mind that if we're going to compare him size-wise maybe to Jack Hughes, it took Jack Hughes till that 3rd and 4th season to really figure out how to operate in a man's league. And I think that's going to be part of Bedard's glow up this year. So for that reason, I like that. A full season of Spencer Knight finally being the guy in Chicago. I do think they will take not like a big step, but a big enough step that 69.5 feels very, very low. Nashville, man, it's anybody's guess, right? But if they get off to another bad start and they go ahead and start Marlinizing the team, which I guess is possible if they struggle again this season, that line of 82.5 is going to feel awfully high.
Yeah, I mean, Nashville's tough to predict because it was like everything that Barry Trotz tried to do last year didn't work. But it almost seems like it shouldn't have been that bad. Can they find the mean?
Did you see his great line at the press conference where he said something like, "We're trying to prove the pundits wrong for the 3rd year in a row"? Because they were the winners of the offseason last year, the losers of the offseason 2 years ago, and they did the exact opposite. So I do like Barry Trotz, but yeah, they're just a total wild card in my mind.
They are a very, very hard team to predict at this point. All right, the Pacific Division, Vegas is Vegas. They always seem to find a way to add talented players. They may not have the loopholes they usually have for the playoffs now that the league has changed that. But what's their projection, and do you see them repeating as Pacific Division winners?
I do. It's 106.5, which almost feels a little bit on the high side. But then you remember that they added Mitch Marner. They found a way, right, to do it. And while they took a little bit of their depth away, I mean, this has been the Vegas model, right? Is they just run 3 lines with one great center, one great two-way winger who can score, and then one guy who's going to kind of do a little bit of everything but can also put the puck in the back of the net. And their systems worked really well for a couple of years. They're also still talking about potentially adding some players, and that's a team that I feel like should probably, even if that's on the high side, you should feel comfortable with going the over on Vegas.
Will we see the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers meet in the playoffs for the 5th straight year? Those teams just seem so linked these days.
I think this might finally be the first time it doesn't happen. Like, here's the thing with the Kings. Their line's at 98.5. This was the best regular season defensive team at 5-on-5 by virtually every metric. And then they got the goaltending to back it up as well. It's almost a shock that they didn't have a higher point total last season than they wound up having. But they're at 98.5 right now. And I have some concerns about, Kopitar in sort of his final run. He is certainly aging. Doughty's getting up there. Missed a lot of time last year with an injury. Is Quentin Byfield ready to take over as a true number 1 center? That would certainly help the Kings this year. And can they expect the same type of year out of Darcy Kemper when they took away one of, and in fact, the best defensive defenseman from the best defensive team last season? So I'm not saying the Kings can't get back to the playoffs. I know a lot of people folks are down on their offseason, but 98.5 feels a little high. I feel like if they get there, it's going to be right on that cutoff line of 93, 94.
They had such a different home road split last year too. I just don't know if they could duplicate that home record.
Yeah, and that comes back to the matchups, right? Like they got to run the matchups the way they wanted to run them. That's going to be a lot harder this year.
How about Edmonton?
Edmonton, I feel like this is fool's gold, right? Like they're at 106.5, and like, when does Edmonton ever start the season on time, right? Like, especially after they're coming off back-to-back trips to the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't think they're going to start the season on time this year, and I think like every year they'll find themselves working their way back into the race. And on top of it, when you look at the general goaltending situation in Edmonton, and you look at the fact that the forward lineup is really uncertain, and they have no Zach Hyman to boot, like they're working a lot of new pieces around their big 3 centers. So I feel like 106 is maybe a little on the steep side. They will comfortably be there, but like Florida, I don't think they're worried at all about what happens in October.
Calgary and Vancouver.
Okay, so I'm probably a little down on Vancouver compared to others, but I'm a big Filip Chytil fan. I love his game. His inability to stay healthy is a real concern for me, and right now he looks like their number 2 center, and I'm still not sure what to make of Elias Pettersson. So 89.5 with a new coach, Tocchet leaving, a goaltending situation where you've got a solid guy in Lankinen, and then you've got to hope that Demko's healthy enough. I just feel like there's a lot of little things that, like last year, maybe the vibes will be better in Vancouver, but I think they're going to have a hard time getting to that 89.5 number. It'll be close. It wouldn't be one of my top bets either way. Calgary, I think they're due for some regression. I like the direction the organization is going. I think you mentioned it with Utah, like the way that Utah has built through the draft and built with depth. I think Calgary has similarly been patient with how they're building, but they also haven't run their veterans out of town. But I feel like they're going to be a little overmatched at the very top of the roster. They're going to need Dustin Wolf to have another monster season. So 81.5, my gut says that they should be able to clear that just barely, but I don't know that I love the bet.
I would go over on Calgary. I mean, again, Dustin Wolf has to stay healthy and he has to play really well. Again, he was the foundation of that team, but 81.5 just seems a little low in my mind. The Anaheim Ducks, new coach, new era. Will you get different results?
Well, I think Anaheim is like the Detroit of the West, honestly. They're at 83.5. And my mind is that, they got pretty close to that number last year, and then they made a whole bunch of changes. I liked trading Trevor Zegras. I mean, I think that they got better down the lineup. I think Zegras' upside is obviously very tantalizing, but he hasn't really shown over the last couple of years that he can get there. I think they got better on special teams, and they needed to. Their power play has been a disaster, but adding Chris Kreider will inherently get you better on special teams because you're going to stick him at the net front, and his hand-eye is going to be huge for that team. They add Joel Quenneville. I think he will probably provide a small boost to that team. So I think Anaheim 83.5. I'm not going to say they're a playoff team, but I think that's an easy clear for a team that they have set, like the table is now set for what they're going to be, but those guys just got to play.
Yeah, and I think they are an up-and-coming team. Look, whatever off-ice issues there were, I think Joel Quenneville is an excellent on-ice coach. I think he'll get them to the over. Seattle and San Jose.
Oh, boy. Yeah, Seattle is tough because I feel like they're probably right in line with the current market bet of 78.5. I would say I'm maybe leaning under slightly, but the issue with Seattle is like their upside feels very, very capped in a lot of ways. But if Matty Beniers is the guy he was 2 years ago, and if Shane Wright builds off of last year, Seattle could have some sneaky upside. You look at the way the defense is built, you look at the goaltending situation, there's not a lot there behind Joey Decord, and I think Decord might be more of a 1B than a 1A. So like, all in all, even if the top two centers pull it together and all of a sudden they have one of the better 1-2 punches there, is it still going to get them too far above that number? So that's a dangerous bet in my mind, Seattle. And then San Jose at 72.5. I kind of like the under there. I feel like they're still a little ways away. I know that folks are all about Macklin Celebrini, and I love Will Smith. I love Michael Misa. I love his line mate. Was it Igor Chernyshov, who was Misa's line mate in the juniors? Like, I love all that. The stories are great. San Jose is really cool. Askarov, like, it's clear that they're moving in the right direction, but I don't know that means that's a huge bump. Where were they last year? Were they what?
It would be a 20-point improvement.
Yeah. See, I just can't see them getting 20 extra points just based off that alone. And like adding guys like Dmitry Orlov, right? Like Orlov looked kind of cooked in Carolina. I think he's an NHL defenseman, but like, again, the difference between being like someone who's going to be a positive value for you and someone who is not going to be a disaster is a pretty wide chasm. So yeah, I don't know that I like them getting to that number.
Yeah, it just seems a little high to me as well. Alex, thank you so much. It's been great having you here, and we look forward to seeing you this season on NHL Game Night. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. We're here Monday through Saturday bringing you the biggest stories from around the hockey world. And once the season starts, we'll also, of course, have Game Night, every game covered from top to bottom. Alex, looking forward to seeing you there. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.